Like, what does it actually mean to you in your most optimistic world? What do you think Bitcoin means? What's its role?
Well, so I've already hinted at the fact that I think that the fiat system has excesses in it. And I think the addition of the digital gold to the world is probably something we need to counterbalance the excesses that we have seen. Like I think it's like pretty commonly believed, even by fiat economists, that zero interest rate policy probably went too far. That like the Federal Reserve was way too loose for way too long, and we're paying for that now. Like even among economists that think Bitcoin is stupid, like there is agreement there. And so when I look at this, I say, look, like at least and this is really focusing on like how I view it as a use case as like an American sitting in America. I think there's actually far more interesting use cases around the world. But if we're just going to start here, I think like having an asset which is not correlate, like a monetary asset which is not correlated with the with Federal Reserve policy is really important. It provides a potential constraint on interest rate on central bank policy, right? Like, because I do believe that there is maneuverability within central bank policy to be looser with money at times when aggregate demand falls, and when aggregate demand gets really high and labor markets get really tight. You got to be really careful with the velocity of money, because that's when you can kind of get into situations where inflation can become really elevated, and that can become very deleterious to the economy. Now, I think having Bitcoin there as like a really as like a major asset is going to have to be something in the future that the Federal Reserve is going to have to consider, in the same way that they've had to kind of consider commodities prices and the fact that precious metals, gold, silver, which I think Bitcoin can be much bigger than those markets as a monetary asset. Secondarily, I think like the inefficiencies of moving money around the world in places where you have serious imbalances of trade on the African continent, for example, where you like Nigeria and Ghana have very little trade with each other, and establishing trade requires like efficient monetary markets. Well, I mean, they can have as much as like 7% slippage between the Nigerian naira and the Ghanaian cedi, just by the virtue of the fact that they have to like basically go and buy dollars in New York or in London, and then sell dollars in New York or in London for like cedi before they're able to get like money literally right across the border from them. That's created structural impediments to expanding trade and creating trade relationships on the continent, which is like really bad. And then Bitcoin shows up, and this is it. Bitcoin is starting to create really deep liquidity markets everywhere in the world. Like you can like Bitcoin liquidity from like Naira to Bitcoin is pretty healthy. Bitcoin liquidity from cedi to Bitcoin is pretty healthy. Same thing in like Argentina. Like, and you're starting to see that like Bitcoin is actually a really interesting liquidity bridge between these countries, where these markets are really deep, and like it's potentially a better remittance asset than say the dollar. Not because like the US is like intentionally doing anything to these countries. It's just the way that their economies are structured. The trade imbalance is there. They don't have deep liquidity with dollars, or they don't have the banking infrastructure to deal with that. And then here, in much the same way that Africans were able to like jump, like leapfrog into the 21st century through smartphones without necessarily having to run landlines everywhere. They have an opportunity to maybe fix some of these financial problems for trade development on the continent by using assets like Bitcoin. And I think Bitcoin has huge potential there. It's one of the things that we're really focused on at TBD. Like we're looking at that Africa, and we're saying like this is amazing. Like we could potentially bridge liquidity between these countries that could provide way cheaper basis for trade. Because think about it, Bitcoin has global demand, but like cedi and naira only have domestic demand. That's a problem when you have a trade balance issue, right? It means that like nobody in Nigeria wants Ghanaian cedi. No one wants to hold that, right? So they have to go and sell it for dollars. But not many people in the world like want to do that. And so the spreads on that trade are really, really wide. But when we look at the Bitcoin markets are like tight. They have actually pretty tight spreads. And so you look at that and you say like, that is like real economic benefit that could be unlocked if we could use this as a way to build like a truly like neutral global remittance asset. And by the way, this doesn't have the problems we brought up before around the deflationary nature of the currency, because you don't really care. Like if you're just instantaneously trying to like bridge a trade and like instantaneously buy Bitcoin with Naira and then sell Bitcoin for CD or sell it for dollars or sell it anywhere in the world and create some sort of complex trade, like you can just do that. You can insulate yourself from the price volatility, and you can just use Bitcoin as a way to transmit value. It doesn't even really matter that you're getting that fiat in on one side and fiat out on the other side. The fact that you're using Bitcoin as the gopher to sort of carry the value across the border and then get access to and take advantage of the fact that it has deep liquidity in these markets and also global liquidity is an amazing unlock. Like this could like create trillions and trillions of dollars of economic growth in the world. So when I sort of look at Bitcoin, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Like this could like literally lift millions of people out of poverty by literally providing the financial infrastructure that is just not there. And Bitcoin is to finance in Africa that as smartphones were to landlines there. Like they're able to just sort of like leapfrog some of these problems by taking advantage of this new technology. I think that's super exciting. It's like why I'm super bullish on Bitcoin. And once you start to have a lot of that utility going on, and once Bitcoin is like pinning itself down in that way, with that level of utility, then yeah, the price of it's just going to go up, and it's going to become even more attractive as an inflation hedge, as like a non-correlated asset for like institutions to use. And it's going to like place constraints on central banks and their ability to not engage in excess in the abstract with like zero interest rate policies that go on for too long, because like markets will have deep liquidity to be able to like move into Bitcoin. Central banks will detect that. That will become problems. They have to manage that. So I'm really bullish on Bitcoin, even though it sounds like I just spent like the very whole beginning of this explaining why Bitcoin's not going to work. I spent the whole beginning of this explaining why hyper-Bitcoinization isn't going to work. I mean, I made a lot of arguments against that, like so far, and I believe that. And it's but at the same time, like I guess I could summarize by saying Bitcoin makes fiat better, and it can make fiat better, and it can also substantially improve like fiat systems that are far worse than our system, and it could do it potentially really quickly. And I'm super excited about that.
Do you also think, therefore, it could end up reducing the number of fiat currencies there are, or because I think something like you talk about the example in Nigeria with the Naira, but perhaps people don't even want the Naira as their secondary currency. Perhaps they just want the dollar. I've seen that in so many countries: Cambodia, Argentina, Lebanon, Venezuela, anywhere that's got a shit currency, they just want the dollar.
Yeah.
So I actually think with the growth of digital dollars, and yes, some of them are on shitty things like Tron, whatever, people still want them and use them. And they like nobody in Lebanon wants the lira.
Yeah.
As soon as they get it, they're trying to get dollar. And so I wonder whether actually the Bitcoin is ironically is going to make the dollar even stronger as a reserve currency.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Like, well, and another statistic is in Latin America, about 20% of all savings are in dollars. It may even be a little bit higher than that. In countries like Argentina, I think the official figure is like I think it's 14-ish% for like that total savings in the country are in dollars. They're not in Argentinian pesos. Some have speculated the actual amount is far higher than that, because a lot of Argentinians will literally store cash under their mattresses, like literally, because they don't trust the bank. So the actual savings rate in dollars may actually be somewhat higher than those estimates, but still 1 out of every 5 monetary units in of savings in South America are in dollars. That's interesting. That's certainly not the case like in the U.S. or in some of the big currency countries like Canada, Australia, Japan, the UK.
What dollars do you hold in savings?
I mean, very few. I'm pretty much all Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think I've got
some pounds, some.
I think the actual dollars I own are in my pocket here. It's like what 20?
Oh, you mean US dollars? I thought you meant Aussie dollars.
Yeah, no, 20, 120. I've got $125 to my name in dollars. And in the UK, there's no scenario I'm like, oh, I need to get more dollars because
British pounds are fine.
Yeah, they're fine. But like I say, all these countries I go to, they want dollars. By the way, they wouldn't take these off me.
Yeah.
They're too screwed up now because they want pristine dollars. And they're mainly cash economies because not only do they not trust the local currency, they trust the banks because they fucking stole their money.
Yeah.
So I just see this world as you digitize money. Perhaps, you talk about Bitcoin bringing some restraints into central banks. I think a digital dollar alongside Bitcoin brings restraints into the smaller economies. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an interesting area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, so there's definitely numerous examples of poorly managed currencies. Zimbabwe is probably the most absurd of all the examples. Mm-hmm. I don't even know how much they've inflated. It's like millions of % or something absurd at this point.
$1 trillion note.
And so there's definitely a problem in a lot of countries around the world. Argentina is a great example of this. They have a presidential election coming up. The leading candidate right now is promising to switch to the US dollar away from the Argentinian peso.
And get rid of the central bank.
Yeah. So I mean, the problem there is, it's the classic problem, right? That the US has been like decently careful at avoiding, which is like not allowing the political branches of government to control monetary policy. We could argue like about whether or not the independence of the central bank has yielded like ideal results. Like we've already like criticized them for holding rates too low for too long, but the fact that there is a separation of power between money and politicians in the United States is obviously very, very important. Independent central banks have sort of been the mantra of sort of the monetarist age, kind of once again going back to Milton Friedman's influences here. And the countries that have maintained independent central banks have done okay, like relative to countries that have not. Right, like another recent example in Turkey, Erdogan basically instructing the central bank to keep rates lower. We saw what that did. It pushed their inflation rate up to like over 50% or something.
Nearly 100%.
Yeah, it was like absolutely insane. So like maintain to the extent that fiat currencies exist, you really do not want politicians to have a say on what happens with rate policy. That has obviously not been the case in Argentina. It was not the case in Zimbabwe. It was not the case in Turkey, although Erdogan seems to have learned on his feet and realized that was probably a really bad idea. But like to the extent that you can at least do that, I mean, that is I believe a necessary feature to currency stability. I would be very, very I'm not worried about hyperinflation in the United States today, which will surprise a lot of people. I just don't think it's in the cards right now. But if we saw the Federal Reserve come under the thumb of, say, a presidential administration and the independence was broken by some populist leader, I would revisit that, and I'd probably be a little bit more worried about the potential of hyperinflation. Assuming that things continue operating the way that they are right now, I think like there is going to be more inflation than people are expecting over the next 10 years for both structural reasons, trade reasons, and also just the hangover of what has happened with debt and bond markets in this country as a result of interest rate policies. But I don't think we're in for, say, 100% inflation here in the U.S. That's just not in the cards, at least on any short to medium term time horizon that is believable.
All righty. So what's your message to Bitcoiners?
My message to Bitcoiners is just like, look, there's so many great arguments as to like why we should be working on Bitcoin. And there's so many arguments for why we should be teaching more people about Bitcoin, why we should be investing in it, why we should be building technologies around it, as we're doing at TBD. And you don't have to be afraid of nuanced discussion. You don't have to be afraid of considering the arguments against deflationary currency or inflationary currency. No, Bitcoin has a really, really strong narrative, even within I don't dare to use the word normie construct, right? Like even if you come in with whole normie assumptions about economics and normie assumptions about politics and normie assumptions about like the world, I think you can come up with a really, really powerful bull case for Bitcoin. And so I don't think you have to go like batshit crazy with like narratives of like the world that are couched in conspiracy and like outrage and like insane emotions to build a compelling case for Bitcoin. It's just like not necessary. There's so many good reasons to believe that this is going to be maybe over time the most important monetary asset in human history. I mean, I don't know how long it will take to get there. Has a long way to go before it could potentially try to claim that title from the dominance of, say, like the US dollar. But like, it's possible that could happen. It's possible. Like it's possible it could happen. And and even if that doesn't happen, I still think that there's a whole range of possibilities that still relate to like a major strong bull case for Bitcoin. So you don't have to be crazy. You don't have to be bouncing off the wall with conspiracy theories. You don't have to be literally on the verge of burning down the state to believe that Bitcoin has a really, really bright future ahead of it. And I certainly believe that. So I'm going to like go back to work and keep working on Bitcoin after this, even after I just poured a whole bunch of cold water on a lot of the narratives that I think are overwrought and not quite correct about the structure of the world.
Well, don't read the comments on this one.
People are going to be really mad.
They're going to be furious and it'll be savage and for you and I. But look, my appeal is to people is that we need the diversity of thought and opinion. Even if you disagree with you, Mike, if these people listen and disagree with you, cool, sharpen your tools, come back with arguments. Really, look for the receipts of what Mike said. I think it's really important.
If someone wants to call me out and have an open and honest debate with me on any of these points, I'm willing to have it. I'm willing to have it here on your show.
Saifedean?
Like, absolutely. Well, if he's willing to have a sort of a open and honest debate and debate in good faith, absolutely. Anyone who's willing to have a good faith debate with me, I believe that my ideas are challengeable and should be challenged, and I should have good responses to people. And if I don't have a response to a well-formed argument against my views, it's going to make me think about whether or not I should be so strident in it. And I think that's how you have to be.
And if no one will debate you, then you can just go and debate ChatGPT.
And I'll just keep coming back, like, every once in a while on your show and just pissing people off.
No,
more.
mate. Listen, like I say, I love it. Danny and I want to have the most diverse range of guests, the most diverse set of opinions. We want to push and pull at this Bitcoin idea over and over and see what we learn. Certainly when I travel, I see a different world from the world that some people talk about on Twitter. I'm like, well, I've been to these countries and I saw something different. So I'm here for it.